This is the day which we have been given. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. Amen. If this is your first time at Unity Church, you are so welcome here. We hope that you might fill out a visitor card and put it in the offering plate as it passes you by. If this is your 40th or 400th or 4th decade here at Unity Church-Unitarian, you are welcome here. If you are watching us online, we are so delighted that you have joined the service today. If this is a day when you need comfort or solace, may you feel soothed by the presence of other souls, just like you, who may be hurting and hopeful all at the same time. If you are here seeking inspiration and hope, you are welcome here. This is a moment. This is a time when you can rest, you can take a breath, you can pause, and you can enter together into deeper worship with the pealing of our tower bell.
These words by the Reverend Kathleen McTeague call us to worship. We come together this morning to remind one another to rest for a moment on the forming edge of our lives, to resist the headlong tumble into the next moment until we claim for ourselves awareness and gratitude, taking time to look into one another's faces and see their communion, the reflection of our own eyes. This house of laughter and silence, memory and hope is hallowed by our presence. As we kindle the flame in this chalice, join me in speaking these words. We light this chalice as a symbol of our faith, the light of truth and the warmth of love.
Please remain standing for our responsive reading. We join together this day with loving hearts and hands and minds, embracing the interconnected web of water, air, and earth.
We light a fire of sustaining hope, ever bright with love and justice. May we bring forth this day new wisdom, strength, and courage.
To create a new world, not of wealth, but well-being. A world of new peace and abundance for all. As we give thanks for this earth, our shared and singular home.
May we dedicate ourselves to its ongoing care.
Rising to the calls deep within us and all around us. May we respond today and always with courage and with love. You're up.
At Unity Church-Unitarian, we often talk about the commitments of a spiritual life lived within, among, and beyond. We work within ourselves to develop personal practice, helping us find and keep our balance. We work among ourselves, developing the skills of small group intimacy that let us go deep quickly with strangers. And we work beyond ourselves, taking the compassion that rises from doing the work within and among and using it to bless the world. It is a joy today to welcome the newest members of our congregation to join us on this journey within, among, and beyond. The most recent to sign the membership book that includes the signatures of every member of this church since 1872. In the living Unitarian Universalist faith tradition, membership is an ongoing process of covenanting and commitment. It is ever evolving, ever transforming, and ever renewing. It is a courageous act to join a church where we ask you to link spiritual and anti-racist multicultural practices into a double helix scaffold for shared ministry. This is not an easy or straightforward ask for you or for us, but we don't do it alone. As you, our new members, commit yourselves to this religious community, know that the congregation also commits itself to you. To be part of a religious community is to learn how to give and receive, how to grow and be challenged, how to agree and disagree in love. We are here to help one another live lives of integrity, service, and joy, and to call out the best in each other. This is the commitment we renew to each other as a whole congregation today, as we honor these wonderful people. Please join me in welcoming the newest members of Unity Church. And new members, please join me in the chancel as I call your name. Mike Luke. Gladys Manuela Torres Almonte. Jim Martin. Ralph McWhorter. Ollie Stalker. Please join me in the responsive reading. We, the members of Unity Church-Unitarian, welcome you and gratefully acknowledge your choice to be here with us, our continuing religious life.
I become a member of this church, aware of the privileges and responsibilities of membership, with a sense of coming home this day.
Ours is a faith which reveres the past, envisions the future, and lives with passion in this moment. Even as we honor those who have brought us to this day, so we celebrate your newly found commitment and eagerly anticipate your contributions.
I bring to this community my talents and enthusiasm, my shortcomings and my doubts. I welcome the opportunity to be of service.
Today, we renew our covenant to seek and speak the truth, to love one another without prejudice, and to respond with concerted efforts to the demands of justice.
I share your aspirations, join you in covenant, and hope to build on your example.
Now, therefore, having affirmed one another in covenant, let us recite together our historic bond of fellowship. As those who believe in religion, as those who believe in freedom, fellowship, and character in religion, as those who believe that the religious life means the thankful, trustful, loyal, and helpful life, and as those who believe that a church is a community of helpers, wherein it is made easier to live life. We join ourselves together, name, hand, and heart, as members of Unity Church. Congratulations.
Each time we gather for worship, we set aside a moment to expand the caring ministry of this congregation. And together we recognize the cycle of life and death, the circle of love, compassion, and witness that is the center of this and every sacred community. For we know that among us there are grieving and aching hearts, mourning a loved one who has died recently or one who is now facing their final days, or who due to illness is no longer present in the way they once were to share in life's joys. And there are those among us who are struggling to make ends meet, facing uncertainties about their future, longing for stability. There are those among us who are facing addictions each day, living as best they can into their promises and their own promise. There are those among us who are struggling with mental health and those who love them unconditionally, fiercely, and those facing medical challenges, their own or a beloved's. And there are those among us who are celebrating new lives, new loves, new opportunities, new beginnings, new commitments, and wonderful achievements. So our hearts expand to hold and embrace all of these truths as we bear witness to one another's lives. Holding in care today is we're holding Ralph McWhorter and his nephew Jacob Childs and Jacob's parents, Lisa and Jay, in our care. Jacob recently underwent his 26th brain and spine surgery at the Duke University Medical Center. And we are sending healing prayers for Jacob's recovery from this surgery. We also send prayers of healing and support this day to Alexander Hagee, the eldest son of Dave Hagee and Teresa Sexy, who is in critical but stable condition in Hennepin County Medical Center after being caught in the crossfire during the mass shooting on May 30th in South Minneapolis that killed police officer Jamal Mitchell. Alexander was in his car picking up his child from daycare. Alexander has a long journey of healing ahead of him, and the family welcomes notes of care and support, but does not ask for calls, texts, or emails at this time. Woe and joy are indeed woven fine, and we have joys to share as well. Estelle Brower is thrilled to announce the birth of Jonah Ray DeCramer to their daughter and son-in-law, Kate and Michael DeCramer. Jonah arrived on June 3rd after 3 days of intermittent labor and weighed 8 pounds and 10 ounces at birth. We celebrate you, Jonah Ray DeCramer, born one more Redeemer. And we celebrate with Betty Cowie, who turned 101 years old on June 4th. Betty is an active participant of Unity's group at Episcopal Homes and joins us online in worship. So Betty, if you are watching us right now, we send you love and happy birthday celebrations. And we are delighted to share the news that Unity members Michelle Macy and Jeff Yelkio are getting married this evening, with Lisa Friedman officiating. A hearty congratulations and many blessings to you, Michelle and Jeff. I'm sure there are names and souls on your heart and mind that you would like to speak into this sacred space so that we may hold them in care as well. Speak those names now. I invite you into this time of prayer and silence. O Spirit of life, thou whose presence animates our daily lives, O Spirit, settle in among and beyond us now as we hold these beloved names and all those unspoken prayers in care. We hold special concern for all those directly affected by gun violence, for the family of Officer Jamal Mitchell, for Alexander and his family, and the innocent victims of our nation's inability to provide effective gun control legislation. We mourn the deaths of the more than 5,000 people who have been killed by gun violence alone this year, and the many, many more injured. We hold in care this morning the ongoing suffering of the citizens of Gaza, for the captives still held in captivity. And we continue to pray for an end to this cycle of violence, retaliation, and bloodshed in Israel and Palestine. We pray for the people of Ukraine. And we pray for all the places around the globe that threaten to tear at the fragile fabric of civilization. We hold in care this morning this pretty planet, this beautiful and fragile planet on which we live. And we pray for its health and vitality and recovery. We hold these aspirations now in silence, knowing that it is often in silence where great things may fashion themselves. From the book Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. Many of you know this book, have read it. I was first introduced to it by Reverend Jan Eller Isaacs, who was deeply passionate about it, and now I know why. Kimmerer writes this: "We are deluged by information regarding our destruction of the world and hear almost nothing about how to nurture it. It is no surprise then that environmentalism becomes synonymous with dire predictions and powerless feelings. Our natural inclination to do right by the world is stifled, breeding despair when it should be inspiring action. The participatory role of people in the well-being of the land has been lost. Our reciprocal relations reduced to a keep-out sign. What could such a vision create other than woe and tears? Joanna Macy writes that until we can grieve for our planet, we cannot love it. Grieving is a sign of spiritual health. But it is not enough to weep for our lost landscapes. We must put our hands in the earth to make ourselves whole again. Even a wounded world is feeding us. Even a wounded world holds us, giving us moments of wonder and joy. I choose joy over despair, not because I have my head in the sand, but because joy is what the earth gives me daily, and I must return the gift.
Now, most Sundays in the summer, you'll find me out in the Unity Garden with our children. There we become a community of gardeners, young and old, bound by shared purpose. Out under the white tent, we light a chalice, and we speak the same words spoken in this sanctuary. We share our joys and sorrows. We hear stories of birthdays celebrated and of camps anticipated, but also stories of bullying, loss, and grief. We hold these stories in that sacred place. These last 2 weeks, we have been planting, a process that can only be described as organized chaos. Soil flies, seeds scatter, kids are wet and muddy. So why do we garden at church? I asked the children. For food, they answered. These kids know where their food comes from, and not everyone does. They learn how to tell when the beans are ready or which tomatoes are ripe. We harvest produce for the food shelf, and we share what we grow with the community. For flowers, they said. Ah, for beauty, I answered. We revel in the astonishing shapes and colors of heirloom tomatoes and in the intricate twists of the leaves inside a head of cabbage. We make colorful salads that would hold their own against anything offered at Cafe Latte. For nature, they said. For worms. For birds. When we cultivate a garden, we cultivate a connection with the natural world. When we hold a seed and marvel at its potential, or gently water a plant, we learn to nurture. We watch from a respectful distance as bees do their important work among the flowers, unlearning a deep fear of getting stung. When we load leaves and food scraps into the black bin and witness their decomposition, we feed the soil that feeds the plants and the birds and us. Gardening is spiritual practice. Here in the garden, we can imagine our place in the world, and we fall in love with this beautiful web of life. Long ago, I spent a spring semester in Germany, and I received a letter from my mother. "You must be itching to get your hands in the dirt," she wrote. She knew me well, for I had already bought a small pot of chives to set in my dormitory window. Many a bowl of soup was garnished with chopped chives by the time I gifted that plant to a friend and returned home. Sometimes a garden can be as small as a 4-inch pot of chives. Planting a garden is an expression of faith that seeds will grow and the rain will come. But I am not naive. I have dug quackgrass until my back ached and gotten over the squeamishness of pulling Japanese beetles off raspberries. I know that not everyone is a gardener, either by choice or due to health or circumstance. While gardening is, for me, a deeply meaningful way to connect with nature, we each need to find our own way to that connection, even if it's just looking out the window. When we eat and consider how food comes to our plate, we are connecting with the earth. Every time we bite into an apple and savor its sweetness, we can pause and give thanks for fruit born of the work of bees and of leaves harvesting sunshine and carbon dioxide to create that sugar. It is the connection and love that is important. We love our trees. Besides gracing our streets, trees provide habitat, absorb pollution, sequester carbon, soak up rain, and provide shade. Our urban forest is increasingly important in this time of climate change. In fact, temperatures can be 10 to 15 degrees cooler in neighborhoods with ample tree cover compared to those without. Tree-less neighborhoods tend to be more diverse, its residents less able to afford air conditioning, and this can be a life-threatening situation. Unity's Act for the Earth team has worked with community partners to grow trees that will be planted at homes in Frogtown. The church provides space for the beds and water for irrigation, and this is happening right outside this wall, the sanctuary wall in the green space. Volunteers organize and dig and plant, and we have forged meaningful relationships with neighbors. One recipient told us with great emotion, "We deserve beauty too." This project is a testament to the power of people working together in community to enact environmental justice. People speak often of saving the earth, but in reality, the earth is a rock that will continue to exist even if life as we know it disappears. A garden teaches us that what we really need to focus on is the biosphere, that thin, fragile, beautiful layer of soil and water and life that clings to the surface of that rock we call Earth, that sustains us and is dying before our eyes. We need to protect that precious biosphere for our survival, for that of our children and grandchildren. But what about other species? What is our responsibility to them? What is a forest worth? If we assess a forest in board feet of lumber alone, we are missing something vitally important. Trees in a forest are connected to everything else, often in ways we cannot yet imagine. Our learned behavior must evolve away from sheer consumption and turn instead toward gratitude and reciprocity with nature. We need to shed what Robin Wall Kimmerer calls our deeply held assumption of human exceptionalism, that we are somehow different and better than other species around us. Other beings shouldn't have to justify their existence based upon their usefulness to us. They have an inherent right to exist. This doesn't mean we cannot harvest lumber, but only that we should do it thoughtfully, in a way that assures the forest will continue to function ecologically. Kimmerer writes further, knowing that you love the earth changes you. It activates you to defend and protect and celebrate. But when you feel that the earth loves you in return, that feeling transforms the relationship from a one-way street to a sacred bond. For our current home, my husband and I vowed to create habitat with native plants. One that I'm particularly fond of is Pussy Toes. That name alone makes me smile, and the tightly packed flowers do indeed look like tiny kitten paws. It is a small plant with leaves covered in silver hairs, and it does well along sunny walkways. One day, when the pussy toe patch had grown to just about 12 inches across, the leaves were bound together in odd shapes, and there were tiny caterpillars. Somehow, in the sea of non-native bluegrass and fescue that dominates my neighborhood, an American lady butterfly had found this tiny patch of pussy toes, its specific host plant, and laid its eggs. It was a miracle, proof that if you plant it, they will come. While the caterpillars feed, I sometimes worry that the entire plant will be consumed. But pussy toes are resilient as prairie plants. They have deep roots, and they recover once the caterpillars undergo their final molt and form chrysalises. The lesson here is that in order to have butterflies, there must also be larval food, and we must accept that plants will be eaten. I am witness to a relationship between this plant and this insect that co-evolved long before my time. They are not mine, I do not own them, but I share space with them, and they bring me joy. The bond between us renews each spring as the butterflies return and give rise to hope that humankind will learn to live reciprocally with nature and that the biosphere will endure.
Before I begin, I want to make a public service announcement and do a shout out and a thank you to Act for the Earth, who purchased this sermon at this spring's auction. And a special thank you to Dale Howie, who I had the pleasure of having lunch with to talk about the service. And he also showed me the work that he's been doing in the properties that he owns, solar panels on rental properties. It was really an extraordinary, extraordinary visit. So thank you, Dale, and thank you, Act for the Earth, for funding this sermon today. Well, I begin with actually another date, June 22nd, 1969. I remember I was skimming the Akron Beacon Journal when a small headline caught my eye. Cuyahoga River catches fire. And I remember asking my mother, how is it possible for a river to catch fire? My brain just could not compute those two things. And what I didn't know then that I know now was that the Cuyahoga River had a history of catching fire that dated all the way back to the 1880s. And as far as the many fires that have the river experienced, this one was relatively small. But as the week unfolded, so did the disgust and the outrage. Why did this one fire spark such outrage? Because for decades, a polluted Cuyahoga River was seen as a sign of progress, understood as a necessary consequence of the industry that had made Cleveland prosperous. But sometimes a conflagration of events occurs, which can either destroy or illuminate. And in this case, Cleveland, Ohio, and frankly, the rest of the country woke up. That one small fire on the Cuyahoga eventually led to the passage of the Clean Water Act. Now, I want to fast forward to 1971. And I was waiting out the commercials in anticipation of my favorite TV show at the time, Dark Shadows. I'm dating myself, I know. One commercial in particular grabbed my attention. A man was dressed in Native American clothing, and he was paddling a canoe towards a landscape of ever-increasing environmental degradation. He's paddling his canoe, and there's waters. The waters are strewn with trash. He looks up, and there's a person throwing garbage out the car window. The smoke stacks on the horizon like the ones I used to see, spewing black smoke from Akron's rubber factories. And the camera zooms in on the face of this Native American, and a lone tear falls from his eye. People start pollution, the ad intones. People can stop it. I cannot tell you the impact that ad had on me. I became an anti-pollution zealot as a result of that. As a Girl Scout, I insisted that we clean up the roadsides, even before it was a thing. If people threw trash out their car windows, I would demand my parents stop the car right then and there, and we would pick that up. I was doing it for the planet, yes, but more importantly, because I wanted that Native American to stop crying about the landscape that he once cherished. I wanted to return the land to that pristine state. So again, I know I'm perhaps dating myself, but how many of you remember that television ad? Oh, yeah. Well, just as the Cuyahoga River fire launched the Clean Water Act, this ad launched an anti-littering campaign and was sponsored by an organization called Keep America Beautiful, KAB for short, which was aimed at changing consumer behavior, which it did. But what I didn't know at the time, nor did my parents or those of us who suddenly became inspired to not become litter bugs because every litter bit hurts, another ad, was two things. First, that ad pandered to American stereotypes of Native peoples. It was exploitative, in fact. And in fact, the actor who played this part, now it's well known, Iron Eyes Cody, was not Native American, he was Italian American. And even more than that, however, is a story of concealed motives. Keep America Beautiful was formed by corporate and civic leaders who were also members of wealthy packaging and beverage companies, including the American Can Company, Coca-Cola, and Dixie Cup, who had a vested interest in litter, but not in the way you would think. So here's the evil genius behind this sleight of hand. The KAB knew that their single-use and disposable cans, bottles, and cups were contributing to the litter problem. So rather than changing their business practice, which would have included producing refillable bottles that produce less waste, they decided to tackle the problem by pointing fingers at people buying and using their products. They shifted the blame to the consumer, telling them, you aren't disposing of our products properly. So the Keep America Beautiful campaign put the blame on you, on me, for being litter bugs, for not recycling. Now, all of this seems perhaps far removed from today, except it isn't. Companies such as Shell and ExxonMobil, McDonald's, Coca-Cola continue to successfully sell recycling as a personal and moral responsibility while supporting the solid waste industry, which generates profits exceeding $81 billion in 2023. Shell and ExxonMobil are investing in the construction of new plastic facilities, which will help fuel a 40% rise in plastic production. So I tell these stories because they are always complex. The Cuyahoga River catching fire, bad thing. But it did force people to take seriously the industrial pollution, which nearly ruined that river and the lake. What's called the Crying Indian ad, which not only promoted harmful Native stereotypes, but shifted the blame to the individual, was a bad thing. And it did wake up America's consciousness to become a nation more aware of how we, as human beings on this one pretty planet, do have a personal responsibility to make a difference, even one decision at a time. So these examples, combined with thousands of smaller, less dramatic decisions, have indeed cultivated a climate of change. And I would argue that is a good thing. It is true that individual actions taken collectively can and do have an impact. And it is also true that it has created a climate whereby our personal and individual actions are being more ever closely scrutinized by each other. What do you mean you don't compost your food scraps? Shame on you. Did you know that a meat-based diet is responsible for the decimation of rainforests? You still eat meat? You should be a vegan. What do you mean you own a fossil-fueled car? Are you aware that you are killing our planet and contributing to the oil industry? In a very real sense, the advertising strategy propagated by the Keep America Beautiful campaign worked. It turned our attention away from the large corporations who are investing in single-use products and gas-fueled everything by turning that anger towards one another. When we feel that something is beyond our control, when we feel powerless in the face of climate change and potential destruction of all that we hold dear, it can lead to anger, accusations, despair. What we fear is living in a Mad Max-type landscape in the not-so-distant future. No trees, no grass, no flowers, no clean water, no fresh air, species dying, food shortages, one dystopian novel away from utter disaster. But I am here to offer a counter-narrative. Anna is here to offer a counter-narrative, because this sermon is about cultivating a climate of change, not climate change. The last thing I did before leaving Cleveland, Ohio, was to swim in Lake Erie and to kayak down the Cuyahoga River, the beautiful, clean Cuyahoga River. The earth reclaimed its beauty, with help, of course. Very few people would consider throwing trash out their car windows anymore, or if they did, they could be hit with a pretty hefty fine. Cultivating a climate of change, of lasting, effective change, is happening. So, don't think for a minute that I'm not encouraging every one of us to consider your personal choices. But what I'm encouraging us to do is twofold. First, supporting one another's choices, even if they aren't our personal choices. You choose not to fly in airplanes anymore. Great! I choose not to eat animal flesh. Fantastic! You own a completely gas-free vehicle. Yes! Woohoo! You've created a garden, growing your own food and teaching children to do the same. Huzzah! We must celebrate every change in our lifestyle, every commitment we make to the planet, every single time we turn away from death-dealing habits to life-affirming choices. We should celebrate, not shame or blame one another, because there is another entity which is bigger than us and is worthy of our blame. Since I've been thinking about this sermon, my conversation with Dale and others, I've tried to keep an ear to the ground about what's been happening out there in the wider world that addresses the largest contributors to climate change. So the second part of this message is to look at the creative solutions that ordinary people are doing to go after the biggest polluters on the planet, corporations, and the most powerful agents for meaningful change, our governments. In April of this year, in the edition of the Minnesota Reformer, the headline read this: "After a long slog, climate change lawsuits will finally put big oil on trial." After years of legal appeals and delays, some oil companies are set to stand trial in lawsuits brought by state and local governments over damages caused by climate change. And what is coming to light is that oil companies' own research projected the dangers of climate change decades ago, even as they tried to undermine scientific consensus about the crisis. So the charges against these big oil companies include failure to warn, fraud, racketeering, and I like this one, being a public nuisance. They would be forced to stop greenwashing, using deceptive advertising, not unlike what we saw with the crying Indian in the 70s, to portray them as companies which support climate justice, even as they continue to increase their fossil fuel production. These lawsuits could put the oil industry on the hook for billions of dollars. Billions. And if these lawsuits are even halfway successful, this could make a huge difference in our ability to arrest the pace of climate change. Internationally, change is afoot too, led by youth and our elders. Probably most of us know about Greta Thunberg, but are you familiar with the Klimasenioren? I haven't got my Swedish accent right, Swiss accent. The Klimasenioren is an association of Swiss women who sued the federal government to take greater action on reducing emissions. And these are all elders, seniors. They charge that their government's inadequate efforts to combat climate change put them at risk of dying during heat waves. Bruna Molinari, who's in her 80s, delivered her claim to the European Court of Human Rights, who said, as a grandmother and mother, I think they have the right to a climate that is better than the one that we have. And the European Court of Human Rights ruled in favor of these elderly Swiss women. They received the biggest victory possible. With temperatures out west, 110 degrees, 122 degrees in Death Valley, with tornadoes tearing through suburban Maryland, with fires in California, floods in the South. We all have reasons to feel scared and hopeless. But here again, nature might be instructive. And to illustrate this point, I want to tell you about a tree that's in my backyard in Charlottesville, Virginia. Outside of our sunroom is a red maple tree that we love. In the summer, it blocks the western sun and provides a home for birds and squirrels. In the fall, its leaves turn bright red as if on fire with the sun. But the year after we moved in, we noticed it looked as if it were dying. And at that point, we decided to call in a tree expert to see if the tree could be saved. And the tree expert gave us a diagnosis. He said, "Your tree is afflicted with gloomy scale." I looked it up. Gloomy scale is the name of small insects which use their piercing, sucking mouth parts. I know, it's kind of gross. To penetrate the tree bark, and if the tree is left untreated, the trees will exhibit twig and ultimately branch dieback, thinning canopy, and eventually death. Gloomy scale seemed like a perfect metaphor for our own confronting of climate change, because the scale of what's happening right now is, well, gloomy, pretty gloomy. And although it is one tree in millions of trees, the thought of losing this one particular tree hit us as hard as if it were a dying friend. So I asked the arborist, can this tree be saved? And he looked at me kindly. He said, "It's up to you. It likely will die without intervention." And I looked at the other seemingly healthy maple trees in my neighbor's yard, and I asked him, well, what might be the impact of us treating this one tree on the other trees close by? He really couldn't say, he said, but it's good to start with this one. So we did. And I'm happy to report that the tree did not die, but continues to thrive with our consistent efforts. And we tend to it every year, feeding it, treating it with the hopes it will give us and itself many more good years on the planet. It's good to start with this one. I think that's pretty sound advice as we think about what it's going to take to save the earth and in turn ourselves. We need to grieve, yes, we need to recall all that is lost. We need to name the species that are extinct. At the same time, we must remember those words from Robin Wall Kimmerer, who says this: even a wounded world is feeding us. Even a wounded world holds us, giving us moments of wonder and joy. And I choose joy over despair, not because I have my head in the sand, but because joy is what the earth gives me daily, and I must return the gift. It is my hope, and the hope of the Act for the Earth team, that each of you find a way to cultivate a climate of care that can and will change the world. May it be so.
Unity Church is framed by statements of conscience, known as its ends statements. One of those is generously give and openly receive compassionate care in times of joy, sorrow, and transition. Our compassionate care extends beyond the walls of this church to communities with which we share a common interest. Each week, the larger portion of our offering goes to a community partner, and this week the recipient is the Housing Justice Community Ministry Outreach Team. Your gift today will also help our team plan and host events aimed at spreading the word more widely within and beyond the Unity community. Will the ushers now come forward? May the work of our hands and the generosity of our hearts be given in gratitude this day. Let the offering now be taken.
Wow. What a wonderful world. Thank you. I hope you have found rich meaning in today's service. There are many things that are happening this week, which I draw to your attention in the insert in your order of service. The only thing that's happening formally after the service today is the Finding Yourself at Unity class, which happens pretty much every Sunday in the Gannett room upstairs. Today it'll be Q&A with the minister, which is me. So those of you who would like to know a little bit more about the church or Unitarian Universalism, please come on up for that Q&A with the minister. And otherwise, after the service, stop by for coffee conversation, see the brand new beautiful art show in the parish hall and in other parts of the building. And with that, I invite you to rise in body or spirit, and let's sing together our closing hymn. Our closing words are by Adrienne Rich. My heart is moved by all I cannot save. So much has been destroyed, but I have to cast my lot with those who age after age perversely choose to recreate the world. Go in peace and recreate the world this day and all days. And join with me as we extinguish our chalice with these words. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, and the fire of commitment. These we carry with us in our hearts until we are together again. May it be so.